Welcome to MMT Chats. This episode is brought to you by ISCAR with new ideas for machining intelligently. Hey MMT followers, Christina Fuges for MoldMaking Technology, and my guest on today's MMT Chat is Matt Lizotte of F&M Tool and Die. And Matt is one of MoldMaking Technology's 30 under 30 honorees this year. So hi, Matt.
Hello.
So first off, I got to say congratulations, and I want to know, how does it feel to not only be nominated, but you were selected as one of our 30, and we got close to 60 submissions. So how does that make you feel?
It feels pretty good. I'm not usually much for trophies or awards or anything, but in this case, it's nice when you work hard to actually be noticed for it. So
that is true. So why don't you explain to everybody watching, what is your current position, and again, what do you do every day?
At the moment, I'm the head of our wire EDM department, which I'm the only guy working at it at the moment, so I kind of am the wire EDM department. But I run 6 wire EDMs. We have a long list of customers, so it's a little bit of everything. But generally, everything is injection molding, and some of it's pretty standard, some of it not so much.
Okay, so in a nutshell, what is F&M known for?
I said it's just generally injection molding, but
okay.
We have customers we work with, Hasbro, Leak Tight, who makes all the 5-gallon buckets,
yep.
Marmon, host of very large customers. So for a small shop, we have a pretty wide array.
Nice, impressive. All right, so why don't you give us a brief snapshot of how you got to where you are today? I mean, I want to give the viewers a taste of what you were like as a kid. You know, we kind of want to promote people's journeys into this trade specifically. So it'd be interesting for you to share your education, you know, things that you liked growing up and how you really ended up at F&M.
Well, I started off, went to a vocational school when I was 14, Montezuma Regional Vocational. And from there, when we went through all the shops, I picked out a couple different metal ones, Metal Fab, Autotech, and Machine Shop. Liked Machine Shop the best, and of all of them, I was drawn by the fact that I was told every one of them tells you, oh, $50 an hour, and blah, 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 gives you the whole spiel. In their case, they also threw in that it's something of a dime trade to some people, and there's a lot less people working it. So as far as I was concerned, it was job security, and on top of that, it's a little bit more dependent on the person and not on a group, which I prefer in most cases. So for me, it was seemed like a pretty solid pick. Plus, I tend to be a little overly perfectionist, so it worked out a little better than some of the others.
That's perfect for mold making, right?
Yep.
Problem-solving perfectionists is what I say everybody in that field is. So that's a good match. So there's a lot of preconceived notions about manufacturing in general, and even specifically mold making. So was there something you came into F&M particularly, having a preconceived notion about the current job or the environment or mold making in general, that you don't believe anymore? Like you thought something and it turned out to be completely different.
Well, actually, in some cases, that's exactly what I was talking about, where everyone tells you it's a dying trade and it's hard to compete in the modern environment. From what I've seen, I don't think that's at all true. It seems to be pretty well the opposite. It's more that companies need to adapt to a modern environment, and quite a few of them simply aren't. So to me, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's out. But
yeah. That's a good one to promote, because not only that aspect of it, but people also think it's dying because people aren't coming into it. And this program that we did, and we did this 2 years ago too, this 30 under 30. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, we're getting these nominations. There are young professionals and even people that are older, but new to this field. So there are people being attracted to it. We just want to continue that trend.
Yeah, it seems to be more a regional thing. Some areas have gone to, and you can't find anyone who even knows what a machinist is. Other areas you go to and they tell you, oh yeah, my brother does that, and my dad and my uncle, and it's a long list of people. So I think it's more regional as to where it's, some areas it seems to be dying off, some areas it seems to be growing.
True, that is true. So what would you consider your #1 challenge since working at F&M?
So when I started here, I came in from my first job that I came out of high school, which was all medical, Small tool room, working with, you know, 4 other guys, all in their 60s. And from there, I came to this job, kind of just came in, threw in whatever department I could fit in. So I was running 2 CNCs, and I took over for the wire EDM operator at that time. So I was told I had a couple of years to learn the ropes from him. I'd never run the machines before. And then he started his own business shortly after. So about 3 months later, I had to take over. And it was not easy to go in the course of 3 months from not knowing how to run a machinery to running 6 of them and having to run your own department. So it was a little bit different.
Wow. Well, what was the key to that? Was there training that was offered to you? Was it learn as you go, make
I just
mistakes?
kind of figured it out.
Okay, Matt, that's impressive.
There was a lot of trial and error and a lot of overtime.
Wow. And I would imagine that is a testament to even the culture there, though, to allow, right, to allow mistakes or to allow you to self-learn. There has to be some patience there, right?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to have a boss who has a little bit more belief in their employees. We were actually in a transition at the time from a different owner to a newer one.
Okay.
So I think on the old owner's part, there was, well, nothing to lose, really. I mean, no one else knew how to run the machines. I was the only guy. And the newer boss coming in was a little more willing to let me do my own thing and not try to micromanage me, and it helped out quite a bit.
Nice.
So luckily, the former operator also, while he started his own business, he wasn't looking to hurt the company. So I was able to stay in contact with him and had some help from him, some help from the companies themselves that were the makers of the machines I was running. And other than that, I kind of just figured as I went through a good amount of trial and error.
That's great. That shows initiative. So what would you say is the most interesting part of your job these days, and why?
One list to choose from at the moment. Well, at the moment, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. I'm working on some other machinery. We are opening up the company to some new areas, including running the actual molds ourselves.
Okay.
At the moment, my big thing is I'm trying to design new procedures and new fixturing for our company to make it so that I'm not quite so hands-on all the time, and also to make it so that I can actually train people to do these jobs in the future.
Nice.
You know, with the old workforce retiring within the next 5-10 years, not just here, but throughout most companies, there needs to be systems in place to actually teach people without telling them, you know, here's a job and you need 10 years of experience. So
exactly.
I'm trying to simplify things to an extent where it can actually be trained in a relatively short amount of time.
That's fantastic. And that's passing it on, right? You got to figure out a way to do that in a simplified manner. That's great.
Exactly.
Is there a particular project since being at F&M that stands out to you that you were a part of that was really, whether it was really challenging or just really interesting? And what was that, and what was your role with that project?
Well, one of our biggest customers for quite a few years running now actually makes what are called dovetail cores. So they make collapsible inserts that go into molds. You've probably seen them before from one customer or another. So making those is a little bit of a different process. It's a lot of just trying, kind of fitting things on the fly, you know, not really measuring things. You just kind of run through it and hope it works out. So they tend to be a pretty unique job.
That's pretty cool.
So,
I am familiar with that.
Yeah, we've done quite a few of those, and that's a pretty standard job. I do a few of those every month usually. So
okay. How about in terms of the shop? What is the most interesting or exciting technology that you've seen or used so far, and why?
Well, in the case of usage, it's definitely been my wire EDMs.
They're still amazing to watch work, a wire EDM. I love watching that.
Oh yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It gets boring after a while because pretty slow running, but they're definitely a fascinating machine. Does something you wouldn't expect to see from most machines, and it was an interesting thing to learn because they're significantly different in the way they run than most.
Exactly.
It takes a few times of crashing a machine too before you remember that there's different things going on in the machine, but they're very different machinery. I've run sinker EDMs, grinders, wet grinders, CNC mills, lathes, everything at this point. Of all of them, I'd say it was definitely the most unconventional machine that I've run.
Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's talk workforce development. So if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, you talked a lot about what you encountered when somebody was leaving and what you had to take on. Well, it sounds like there's some sort of informal mentoring going on, and mentoring is kind of a hot term these days with the new generation coming in, the seasoned generation leaving. You hear that a lot, that people teaching each other. But I am discovering that it means different things to different people. So do you have a specific take or definition of how you, Matt, define what a mentor is?
Kind of a tough one to answer. I've trained a few employees, never fully, because unfortunately they always go off to college sometime near the end, which gets a little depressing when you work with someone for 8 months plus, and then you're going to college and you go, damn, now I got to do this again. So I've trained a few, and I've had pleasure of having some very good teachers throughout my career now, both at MMT Tech and more than that outside of it. And every one of them has their own different approach, including myself. I think a lot of it is tough because you have to be able to do it without stepping on their own ways of doing things while instilling your own. And it's also sometimes a little bit tough because one of the hardest parts of it is you have to realize really everyone has their own use. Some people are great at one thing and horrific at another.
Yeah, true.
So I've worked with some people who I start training them, and shortly into it, you realize, okay, they're not good for this job, but you can look over and be like, well, that machine over there, they'd be perfect for that.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is really a little on the tough side when it comes to that, because you're training everyone individually. Everyone's got their own way of learning, their own way of doing things, and you have to adjust a lot to each individual person.
I was gonna say, so it's really.
In my case, I know I'm one of the harder ones to teach.
Okay.
Once I learn something, I do better at than most, but teaching me is not easy by any means.
That's funny. It really is, from how you describe it. You got to get to know the person, right? It's a relationship to understand how that person learns, right, and what they are good at, and where their interest is in things to know. So it's relationship based. So what's interesting is you mentioned before you get involved in training people, and you've had people leave. So this kind of segues nicely into my next question. I don't know why they left, but is there a particular trait or quality or skill of somebody coming in that you think they have to have this, or they're just not going to be successful in mold making?
Well, there's two things I think everyone needs to have. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, it helps to be a little bit of a perfectionist. It's a trait in which OCD is sometimes a good trait to have. And patience is always one of the most important things, because I've seen more often than not. I always tell people when I'm teaching them, I don't care how much you get done. I just want you to take your time and do it the right way, because all too often people try to rush things, and you find things take 3 times as long when you have to do them 2 or 3 times to get through it. But I think of all the qualities, the most important one I've seen is the ability to actually admit when you're wrong about things. People who don't do so good at admitting when they make a mistake are horrific machinists. I've dealt with quite a few of them, and I've dealt with some who right off the bat, they'll admit, okay, I screwed up, and you can't really find what you did wrong if you don't admit that you screwed up in the first place, and far too many people aren't willing to take that step, so they continue making the same mistake over and over. And as a machinist, there's a lot of mistakes you can make, so you kind of have to figure out what the mistake is and continue to work at it and try and diagnose the issue so you can get through it.
Well, so I always say you have to figure out the mistake so you don't repeat the same mistake again, right?
Yeah. And I've worked with people who did that, and you'd see them make the same mistake 8 times in a row, and by the end, you're like, you just did this. Why didn't you learn from it the first time?
Exactly.
So.
All right. So attracting that next generation. We want more of that. We want that to continue happening. What do you think must change in mold making specifically to attract more next generation coming into this field?
Well, it's a somewhat tough thing, as I talked about earlier with supply and demand. It's kind of the reason I got into this trade, seeing that there was less workers, and it's a very sellable thing to people to be able to tell them, you know, you have incredible job security because you can always have places to go. And it also raises how much money you can make quite a bit when there's not 30 other people vying for your job. So
True.
as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot going for the trade. You know, how many jobs can tell you that they have a negative employment rate in some areas, and
Yep.
you're basically guaranteed a job, that you're guaranteed decent money. And you don't need a college degree either, which for a lot of people is, including myself, quite a good thing to have on there. So there's a lot going for it. Trying to get that information out to people is sometimes not so easy. We live in a culture where, unfortunately, it's always, you know, college degree is always best, and in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. One of the situations where it's not. So marketing all of that is somewhat tough, but I think it needs to be brought to kids at a younger age, where they try to target people as they go into high school a little more and show them that the trade actually has quite a bit to offer to people.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Most of you have had some kind of touch with it growing up, you know, whether it was in the family, whether you just liked breaking down toys or bikes and building them back up. So that seems to be this common theme. But it is worth saying, even if you're not like that, there are typical job opportunities on the business side of a mold shop, right? That you can still be working within manufacturing and not be a machinist or a programmer or a designer or a repair tech. I mean, there's HR, there's marketing, there's sales, there's so many inspection, quality, right? There's lean manufacturing specialists. So I think it's worth it to say, you don't have to look at it one way. There's a myriad of opportunities, but get yourself in manufacturing, because if we all thought of it that way, that in itself is job security. We want to be making more of our own stuff, and there's plenty of jobs that can help make that happen. Right.
Exactly. And it's a very, very wide trade. I mean, you have engineering, programming, actually loading machines up, you have polishing, PM. So there's everything from never leaving the office to every single day working with your hands. So there's quite a wide array.
Exactly. All right.
And I think the only thing most companies can do individually is, honestly, I think a lot of companies are running much older machinery, at least on smaller companies, than is necessary. You know, you go to any job and tell them, you know, you have to use a tool that's 40 years old to do your job. Most people you expect are going to look at you a little ridiculously. So if you have young kids coming into a trade, you don't want to tell them we expect you to use machinery that's twice your age.
Yeah.
So I think
that is a good point. Yeah, that is a good point. All right. Last but not least, might be the toughest one. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
With all the changes that's gone on in the past 5 years, that's a scary one to answer, because I know I would have answered it wrong 5 years ago. Close, but not quite. Hopefully with a few more employees working under me, I'd like to be in a slight bit more of a management position where I can have other people running the machine and telling them how to run it instead of doing it myself. I think more of an educational role than do-it-yourself kind of role, because currently, obviously, with lack of employees and everything, it's tough. But I said I'm trying to design new procedures and new ways of teaching people, so that in the future, it's the more experienced people around are able to teach instead of having to do it themselves and never having the time to pass on the information they know.
I love it.
Because obviously it gets you just stuck in a mire that you can't get out of. So
exactly. Sounds like you're on the leadership track, is what it sounds like to me.
I'd like to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, that about does it. I want to thank you, Matt, for your time. I want to say congratulations again. It was a joy to find out a little bit more about you, and I hope maybe your stories and all these stories inspire some next generation kids and young adults to come into this field. So again, congrats, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
And to everybody watching, for everything mold making, visit moldmakingtechnology.com. Stay safe and healthy, and more importantly, stay informed and stay inspired.